in the marathon, you when you decide you're done, your legs are totally done. But when you're wired to keep going, it's just so amazing what the body can do when you have control of your mind.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who almost drowned in the Indian Ocean at 11 years old, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 72 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you so much for being here today with me, for joining me on this episode, for learning from this episode, and hopefully taking a lot from this episode. And I hope you will share it with your friends if you are enjoying it. So last week we heard from Lindsay Hine of I'll Have Another podcast. Lindsay gave the mamas and mamas to be out there advice for running through and after pregnancy. But she also gave us advice on how to handle life when you are a little overwhelmed. With 4 boys, she definitely will be that way. And we also covered how you can start your own podcast and grow it, or how you can grow your social media. So it's quite a different one, but quite interesting. So hopefully you enjoyed that one. Today, I have one of my good friends and favorite pro runners, Jared Ward, on the show. Those of you who know me from when I hosted Run to the Top will remember that Jared was one of the final interviews I did, and it was an incredible one. He gave so much good advice on how we can learn to pace ourselves and run our best race. The advice was so good that many of you are newer listeners that I thought you cannot go without getting this advice. So I wanted to go over some of it again and go a bit deeper into topics like running in the heat, handling expectations, and there's a lot more in this episode. We covered a lot in this hour of time. Jared and I get on really well, and if you follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, you'll probably love to follow Jared too, because we're both very similar in a lot of ways. Now, before I get to the show, on Monday I had a bonus interview for my 30th birthday, and you heard all my updates on how things are going with me. But I'm not sure if you did listen. If you didn't, you will not know, but now I'm telling you that I'm doing birthday week giveaways. So every day this week, I have been giving away something to the listeners or the fans if it's on Facebook or Instagram. And there's still 3 days left if you are listening to this on the Friday that this comes out. So you have 3 days to enter to win special prizes. I'm not going to tell you what they are. I'm going to let you go find out. But if you go to my Instagram, which is at TinaMuir88, so Instagram.com/TinaMuir88. My Facebook page is Facebook.com/RealTinaMuir. And you can also find some in the Superstars community at TinaMuir.com/Superstars. So go enter and win yourself something cool. I would love to hear who won and who not. So one more thing I just want to tell you, we have a quick word from our sponsors coming. Hoka One One has a new shoe to introduce you to today. It's their fan favorite, the first shoe ever created, and you'll see why they call it the sweetest cushion. If you go to hokaoneone.com or bodyhealth.com and use my coupon code, which I'm going to give you later in the episode, it really does directly help support me. These episodes are free, remember that. And you trusting my advice to get these products really shows these companies I'm worth it. So thank you so much for your support. All right, let's hear from them and meet Jared. This podcast is sponsored by Hoka One One. Hoka One One is a running shoe unlike any other, and you're going to love it. If you haven't tried them yet, what are you waiting for? Run in their newest release, the Bondi 6. Run for any distance with a plush, soft ride. The Bondi 6 is the sweetest cushion. Jared, thank you so much for joining me on the Running for Real podcast, which feels weird saying welcome to this podcast because I feel like I've interviewed on it before, but I have not. You have not been on my new podcast. So thank you so much for giving me some time and talking to me today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be on. It's always fun chatting with you.
Yeah, it is fun. And last time I saw you, we met at I can't remember, Homemade Pie Kitchen, I think is the name of it, in Louisville.
Yeah, that was good.
That was good. You had pie, right?
I think so. That's what I remember.
Did. And I had ice cream, I think. Or did I have a cake? I can't remember. But anyway, it was good. It was sugary. It was good. We chatted, and I was pregnant. You were doing the commentating the next day for the national championship. So it was fun to chat, but this is going to be more of a, I don't want to say a productive chat because I feel like our chat then was even productive, but this is going to be kind of really helpful for our listeners. I know that you are like the king of giving helpful advice, so I'm quite excited for this. But firstly, for those who do not know...
You're too nice. I think I think we're very much on the same vein a lot of times, it seems like, with our thoughts and ideas. But...
Yes, I definitely agree. And we're going to go into a lot of these today. So, but for those who don't know you, who is Jared Ward?
Who am I? I'm a dad and a husband.
Start with that. Both of those. That's so cute. Anyway, keep going.
I had the chance to represent the United States in the Rio Olympics and had the best race of my life there to finish 6th. And I teach statistics at BYU. I teach one class. I'm going to be an adjunct professor there, and I love doing research to deal with running mechanics and pacing in the marathon and things like that. And so I'm a bit of a running nerd.
Which we love, and most runners tend to be, so that's absolutely fine. Although I didn't know you were interested in running mechanics. That's cool. That's something new.
Yeah, it's kind of, a guy that I train with at BYU, Dr. Ian Hunter, is a biomechanist. And I've had the chance to work with him and do the statistics on a lot of the at least a few of the analysis that he does. Okay. And so that's been really fun. And I've learned a little bit more about form and cadence and stride length and ground time and kind of this type of stuff. And it's been fun to do some of that with him.
Has he analyzed your form?
Yeah, absolutely.
What were the things he's had you work on?
Well, so Ian is very much he buys into research that has said that our bodies do a really good job at finding the most efficient form for us. And so he never, his approach isn't to get somebody under his camera and on his treadmill and say, okay, these are all the things you need to switch. He's looking for big asymmetries or things that are drastically off. And then he'll give some advice, but even more so, he's interested in looking at the type of running form that reacts differently with different types of shoes and things like that he wants to figure out, okay, you're a heel striker, say, and he's not going to say heel striking's bad, but he's going to say this is maybe a type of shoe that you're going to respond well in, or these are potential injuries that might come because of your cadence. That's most efficient for you. So these are some exercises you can do to be preventative on that side. So he has a little bit of a different approach.
That's cool.
But yeah, it's very fun. It's very fun to work with him.
Okay. And then one more thing on that, just responding to that, you being a Saucony sponsored athlete, what shoe has he said works well with you then, or you respond well to? So
we're doing some stuff in that, but as a heel striker, you typically look for something that has a little bit more heel cushioning because you're going to take a lot of that impact right from right at contact. And so I love the Saucony Triumph. It seems to fit really well for me. It has an 8mm drop in it. But an issue with heel strikers is that you're often putting a little bit more stress on some of those frontal muscles, the front of your shin, even up into your knee and things like that. And so a lot of times when I'm feeling a little bit of front leg stress, I'll opt for a shoe like the Kinvara with a little less drop that puts me just naturally as a little bit more of a toe, puts me a little less heel strike and a little more on toe, which puts more of the strain on the back of the leg, Achilles, calf, stuff like that. And so I use some of that stuff that he talks about to determine, based on just where I'm feeling a little bit worn down, maybe what I need to wear for that day.
Wow, that's cool. And that's good that you've been able to use it and get the best out of it with the variety of shoes that Saucony has. So that's awesome. Okay, so let's first dive in with what you are up to. You did mention you'd run in the Rio Olympics. You have had a few setbacks over the last few years. Maybe you can tell us a bit about those and then where you are at now with what's next for you.
Sure. Going into Rio, I started feeling some new pain, and it moved all over my hips. It seemed like at the first it felt like it was a little bit more on the groin, and then it felt more a little bit like hip flexor, and then I was feeling it, in my lower abs, and I really didn't know exactly what was going on. And but I was, at the time I was maybe a month or two away from Rio, and training otherwise was going really well. My fitness was fantastic. And so I was grateful for what was going well and just wanted to push that onto the back burner. And, I had some times where I thought, well, maybe I should go in and get an MRI and figure out exactly what's going on. But then I thought I'm going to keep doing the same things I'm doing anyways, because I want to be ready for Rio. And so what does it matter? And I ended up spending a lot of time with physical therapists, chiropractors, and things on keeping my hips really loose and kind of the machine well greased, hoping that it would kind of just get through the Olympics. And fortunately, the Olympics went really well, but then that set me back for a long recovery. It seems like with injury, if you put it on the back burner, it doesn't just go away. It stays there on the back. Price. Right. And it just keeps cooking back there until you bring it to the forefront and you take care of it. And so eventually I got to taking care of it. It didn't heal on its own. I gave it a couple months after Rio with light running. And then I went in to see a doctor, and he took an MRI, and he came back and said, your pubic bone is littered with stress reactions. I think was the phrase that he used, and said that there may have been, some more damage in there that had kind of healed up a little bit. And so I took some time off, but, I was I was coming off the best year of my life. I lined up races for 2017 so far in advance, that I felt like all of 2017 was, trying to get as recovered as I could, and then realizing I was kind of under the gun, so to speak, for my next race. And so I would train hard and get ready for it, even though I wasn't quite healed all the way. And so this pelvis thing ended up lingering until finally, in fact, it was after New York Marathon last fall, which was about right when we had connected there in Louisville. And it was at that point where I really shut things down long enough and began to take more of a proactive approach to getting better. I feel like with injury in the past, I'd often thought, well, if you take time off, it just gets better, and that was like the gold standard. If you could give an injury a week or 2 weeks, or at worst 3 or 4 weeks of rest, anything would heal, and began to learn that wasn't really, 2017 taught me that wasn't the case with this pelvis problem. And so I became a lot more proactive in terms of physical therapy and exercises. And I felt like through the winter, I was doing a lot more old man exercises than I was doing running, intervals, and training, and really took a slower, gradual approach, and finally, I think, got myself healed up from that. But it was one of those things where I don't really regret it in this case, where that was my shot at the Olympics that year, and there's certainly no guarantees that I'll ever get an opportunity like that again. Absolutely. Certainly hope to, but there's no guarantees, and I'm glad that I took advantage of that. But I also learned some things about how you have to be careful with injury, and especially as I get older. I turned 30 later this year. I need to be a little bit more careful than when I was 22.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm, by the time this goes live, I will be 30. So I'm definitely hearing you right now that even though people often will say to people like you and I, oh, you're still young, you've got, plenty of time, but I can definitely see a difference in my body now to early 20s, and it does catch up with you. Before we go on, during that time when you kept kind of essentially taking one step forward, one step back, or kind of back and forth, Was that hard for you in any way? Did you feel a certain pressure? Like, I was in the Olympics last year, I've got to perform this year or everyone's going to think, that was my one and done kind of thing. Did you feel that pressure, or were you able to just kind of say whatever, like, you guys can think what you want?
I honestly, I feel like I don't know if I felt a lot of pressure because I had performed well in 2016. Honestly, I kind of felt a new sense of belonging in some of these elite fields that I was in. I felt like I went into the Olympics very grateful to be there, but that I came home from the Olympics feeling like I belonged there. And so it was kind of a growing up phase there for me. What I did feel, though, was pressure to perform for these races that I had committed to. And sometimes it's silly in hindsight. I think, well, I didn't end up running as well as I'd hoped anyways. And so, maybe they would have appreciated just as much me saying, hey, you know what, I'm just not going to be 100%. Let's try this next year. But I did. I felt pressure to get out there and to perform because I had committed to come to these races and they had promoted it and sponsors were there and excited to have me. And I think I put more pressure on myself that way than I needed to.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, and it was a good opportunity, sponsor wise and race wise, coming off of 2016. Some good financial opportunities. And so there was a little bit of pressure I felt like there to take advantage of, getting out and earning some money to, I don't know, pad this hobby that I love so that I can keep doing it as long as I want to and take advantage of some of those opportunities. But I do, I learned that, especially for the marathon, you can't really fake it through a marathon. And there were training cycles where I thought, you know what, I was going into the marathon living on 2 or 3 workouts that really went very well, but maybe not the maturity to recognize that the whole 3 or 4 month segment was not the same segment as I had been having in 2016 and 2015 before marathons. And I learned that it's not one of those races that you can just Hail Mary, so to speak, and try to give it a go. You really have to be prepared for that. And so I matured, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, no, and that's not really surprising. I think anyone in that situation would have been handling it the same way, regardless of age or anything. I would imagine the women who finished up pretty near the top at Boston Marathon are kind of very much experiencing that right now, especially being thrown into the limelight like that. And feeling that, when they get invited to races and things, that they have to perform as well. So on that note, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Boston Marathon and how you would have done, because most elite runners that I've talked to since that race have all kind of had this, I don't want to say underground, but kind of a conversation of, or at least wondering, how would I have done in those situations? Such a rare race in the way that it kind of unfolded. So I'm curious, you tend to you're a pretty gritty runner and you like to kind of fight. How do you think you would have done at Boston? Do you think that would have been a good day for you? Or do you think you would have been someone who would have probably struggled more than maybe you'd like to admit?
Well, see, that's hard to say. Certainly where it fit this year, I think, I wouldn't have been ready for the race. I had been going through this kind of roller coaster of hurrying and getting ready for a marathon and then recovering for a long time after because I wasn't quite ready and I was still half injured, and certainly would have been a similar case this spring had I been hurrying to get ready for a marathon as opposed to recovering. And so I think, on the reality is this year, I think I made the right decision in terms of just taking care of my body and setting up for a good fall opportunity. But, that said, I certainly watch races like that and think those are the ones that are at least the opportunity for me to finish on a podium or have a stab at winning a race like that. I'm never going to win a Boston with tailwinds when they run 2:03. That's just not going to be my race. But maybe on a 2:15 to 2:18 day in the cold rain, maybe I can squeak onto the podium there. And so that certainly is a thought. But, I was having that thought after this Boston Marathon, and I watched the whole thing and was tweeting during it and excited to be a part of it that way. And I was watching the miserable conditions and thinking, oh man, I'm glad I'm not there. This just looks terrible. And then when they got to the finish and we were watching some of the wreckage and what happened to those elite fields, with only 30 or 40% of the runners even finishing, then I started to have those thoughts of, oh man, why couldn't I have been in that race and been given that opportunity? But then, it was later that day that I thought, why do I think that I would be one of the ones that made it to the finish line and not one of the 60% that didn't? I could have been subject to the hypothermia just like everybody else out there.
Oh yeah.
And I've certainly had my share of cold races that I struggled in. My last cross country at BYU, it was really cold and kind of that windy, rainy kind of weather. And I struggled at the end. I was freezing. And so, it's hard to say, it's easy to sit back and watch a race and think, oh yeah, I'm tougher than them. But, but the reality is, we forget very quickly what it feels like to be in the middle of a race, hurting and freezing and muscle cramps and everything else.
How quickly your mind can flick a switch and you can be like, right, that's it, I'm done. Like it just takes a split second of you giving in to that voice saying stop, and then you're on the side of the road and you're out. Like it's, of course you can start again, but the reality is most people aren't going to do that if they actually take that step to get off the road. So I actually, funny story, I think most of my listeners know this, but you don't, Jared. I once had a panic attack in a race, a Thanksgiving race of all things. It wasn't an important one. I was winning, but I had a panic attack on the side of the road, but it was over a bridge and I was only halfway across the bridge. So there was no way out except to keep going along the course and finish, so I was walking along, kind of grabbing a hold of the rail or whatever it was, the wall, I think. And I was just walking along the course and I started running a bit and then I was like, no, I'm done. So I stopped again, jumped over the thing, jumped back in, and then went again because it was along the course. So I had no choice but to carry on along the race. And then it was this kind of battle between my mind kind of saying, yes, let's do this. No, let's not do this. Yes, let's do this. And I ended up finishing, and winning somehow. But it was definitely a lesson I learned about how quickly your mind can switch between I can do this and no, I can't. So that was quite.
Isn't it amazing though the power of the mind, and like if you can really harness your mind, what you can do. I mean, I think that's so amazing, and when people check out of races and you say, okay, I'm done, your body stops working, in the marathon, you when you decide you're done, your legs are totally done.
Oh yeah.
But when you're wired to keep going, it's just so amazing what the body can do when you have control of your mind.
I think Callum Hawkins in the Commonwealth Games, I'm sure you heard about that, is a good example of that. His body had completely checked out, but he was just one way, like he would have finished if he could have, if his body physically could have been able to do it, his mind was going to try and override it. But very interesting. And on that note, okay, so heat, that race was in the heat. This is the time of summer marathons. The fall, maybe the early marathons might be warm. You've raced plenty of those, plenty of races just in general in the heat. What is your best advice for runners if they are, planning a race, maybe a Chicago that might be a bit warm, or another early fall race that might end up, being in some pretty significant heat?
Well, I think you just have to be a little bit more patient. It's amazing that I feel like if you're 5 seconds or 10 seconds per mile quicker on your pace, then in a half marathon, you can pick up, maybe up to a couple of minutes of time getting halfway through. But it's amazing how quickly you can lose 2 minutes at the end of a marathon when you're overcooked. Half a mile, you can lose 2 minutes. And so I think it's just a better approach, especially in the heat, to say, you know what, let's be just a little bit careful. And if things feel good at the end, over the last 10K, you can make back up some of that time. But it's just so it's so amazing how quickly you can lose time that you've put into the bank when you overcook. And I think you just really have to be careful with that. And there are things you can do. In the hot marathons that I've run, I would take a cup of water at every single aid station every mile.
Like a whole cup?
I would grab the cup, I would take a swallow or two of it and dump the rest on my head.
Okay.
But I think you can do a little bit of preventative maintenance early in the marathon.
Mm-hmm.
You're still sweating, you're still losing some water, and you might not feel bad at mile 7, but getting an extra swallow of water there is going to help you at mile 20.
Yeah.
And so I think just being aware of the reality that you're going to lose a lot of water when it's hot, and trying to take care of that, I think can go a long ways. At the Olympic trials in LA, when it was so hot, I finished the race. And I remember, after greeting some of my family and stuff, I was signing one of the forms that the guy that's there as my chaperone for drug testing has. And he says, "Hey, I'm your chaperone until we get you through drug testing. We need to collect some urine from you. So you just let me know when you're ready." And I kind of said, "It's 80 degrees out here. It's going to take me a minute." Yeah. And I drank 2 gallons of water before I was able to give them their 90 milliliters or whatever they needed, a couple of ounces of fluid out of me. And it was hours later.
Did they let you drink that much? Because they wouldn't let me, when I was drug tested once in a hot race, they wouldn't let me drink that much water because they said, "We don't want you to dilute it." But maybe in that situation with a marathon, they knew that you were so dehydrated. This was a cross-country race.
So.
But anyway, continue with what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they would have had some advice for me, but I just kept drinking I was thinking, well, I don't want to wait long enough that I'll be diluted, but I didn't need to go to the bathroom again until 10 p.m. that night. And I estimate that I really lost close to 2 gallons of water in that race. And so when you start thinking about, the scientists and the kind of the research there will say that performance starts to suffer when you lose somewhere between 2 and 4% of your body weight in water. And 2 gallons of water for me would be much more like 10 to 12%. And so I think when you start thinking, hey, it's hot and we're going to be losing, and that was for, I ran a 2-hour marathon, 2 hours and 13 minutes. So for someone who's running a 3-hour marathon or a 4-hour marathon or a 5-hour marathon, it becomes even more critical that you're replenishing some of those fluids because you're out there for a long time.
Yeah.
That's a grueling thing. And so I think anytime, even early in the race, we don't want to be drinking so much that our stomach is heavy and that we're getting stitches and that we're burping and whatever. But I think anything that you can get into you fluid wise when it's hot early in the race is just going to pay it forward.
Mm-hmm. Very good advice. And do you have any other things that you do? Like, would you say, I always wear a hat. Do you wear a hat? Like, are there other things, like I've heard of people putting ice cubes in a hat so that it melts down? Any other little tips or tactics that you personally have used? Maybe dunking your wrists in cold water, things like that. Anything you use?
Sure. So there's, that the ice cubes in the hat to me is very much a Galen Rupp method. And he's done that. I really like to train in hats, to keep the sun off of my face. I haven't done much racing in them. And so I don't know, what that would be like, in terms of hot weather. I think in terms of keeping the sun off you, if you can get a light colored hat, that's probably not a bad thing. I like sunglasses. I feel like they help my face relax when it's real sunny. I don't like the squinting and, you start getting that tightness in your face. And I feel like the sunglasses have helped with that. A lot of the elite athletes will have these ice vests that they're warming up in, trying to keep their core temperature down as long as possible. Coach Icestone back in college would have us carry bags of ice in our hands while we were warming up because there's so much blood flow that goes through your hands that can kind of carry a little bit back to your center. I don't know that, some of the research on that stuff says by the time you're a half an hour into your marathon, there's not much of a difference between anyone who's done much of that preventative stuff. one thing that I think you can do is try to do a couple of things that will increase your plasma, the amount of plasma you have in your blood, or essentially how much water you're carrying. And the research that I've looked at has said it only takes about 10 days worth of training in in a hot climate, a hot, humid climate, or whatever you're preparing for, to have the effect of increasing your plasma. And so what I'll try and do, maybe the week before, or so I guess maybe 2 to 3 weeks before, a hot marathon, is I'll try to do at least, 60 minutes of my running in kind of the heat of the day. And oftentimes I'll even wear like a long sleeve shirt for that. And I'm not doing workouts for this. So this isn't interval sessions or tempos or my long runs or anything that I really am trying to get after. This is just recovery runs. And I'll try to get about 7 to 10 days of 60 minutes or so of effort at a very much a recovery pace, but in that heat. Okay. And the research says that's enough to up how much plasma is in your blood, and then you're carrying a little bit more water to the start line. It's
good advice. Thank you. Really helpful. And then finally, with these warm races, the mental side. We all know that it is more difficult, just as it is in that cold, windy weather that we talked about. But in the heat of the day, or, when you're trying to run hard and it is getting hotter by the minute, how do you stay strong mentally and not let it kind of defeat you and allow you to kind of give in?
Well, that's hard. And it's hard in the marathon because you're trying to balance these two mindsets of this is a marathon and it's hot and I need to take care of myself and I'm paying attention to how I feel and I'm taking preventative measures early. But then you also want the mindset of at mile 22 to be, I'm tough, I'm going, this is my pace, I can do anything in the world. I don't care how my body feels. And it's hard to balance two mindsets that seem so polarly opposite.
Yeah.
And so what's been beneficial to me is to kind of start, I take my focus in the marathon and I treat it like a funnel. And so at the beginning of the marathon, my focus is very broad, even to noticing what's around me, the beautiful scenery that I'm passing or what the buildings look like. And I'm very in tune with, okay, where am I getting my nutrition? How am I going to make sure that I get enough fluid in me? Where's my next water station? How can I make sure that I don't miss that, or I'm ready to drink as much as possible, or whatever. And so I'm kind of thinking about those things early, but then throughout the race, I'm gradually trying to funnel my focus so that by the time I hit 20 miles or 18 miles or wherever that wall happens, that I'm not still in that mindset of how do I feel? Because if you hit the wall and you're thinking, how do I feel? The answer is going to be, I'm not feeling very good.
To put it lightly.
So at mile 16 or mile 18, you want to be thinking, this is a race. Am I in the right position? How quick am I going? Where's my pace? How are my competitors feeling? What's the right time for a break? Am I ready to push the brake? Things like that. And so by mile 16, I want to be focused. And so I kind of have cues throughout the race, and I've predetermined these, something that I see at 10K that says, all right, I'm 10K in. Check off the quarter of the way done or so box, and let's relax and move through this next 10K. And then I'll have something around half marathon where I think, okay, it's time to assess how my competitors are doing. And it's interesting to me that's just something that's worked really well for me in terms of getting me focused, is I start listening to how everyone else is breathing and start paying attention to how the guys around me are moving, and do they look labored or do they look easy? And that just fires my competitive switch, beginning to look at these other runners. And so that kind of starts me into taking myself from this broad focus down into this narrow focus, so that hopefully by the time I'm hitting mile 16, 18, 20, I'm racing. I'm no longer thinking about how I feel. I'm still reaching for water and very aware that I need to be keeping myself hydrated. But by that point, I'm racing. And it doesn't always happen easy. I remember in the Olympics, the leaders broke away at about 15 miles. And I instantly had this feeling of, oh, I don't feel very good. And they were pulling away, running a faster pace than I was prepared to run. And I was still going to run my pace. But all of a sudden, I wasn't in the lead pack anymore.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as fun. And it became hard. And I started to think, what's going to happen if I can't finish this race? You know, my family is here and all these people are watching me at home. All of America is watching me at home. What happens if I can't do this? And that is not positive thinking.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first things that we need to have in our arsenal is a number of things that we can say to ourselves to get us back into the here and now, focusing on what's in front of us. And I learned in this race, you know, that and I think I knew this partially before, but I wasn't necessarily worried about how I felt right then at mile 15 or 16. I was thinking about too far ahead in the race. I think one of the things that makes the wall and the marathon so debilitating is we're at mile, say, 16. And that's about how long our glycogen stores can last. So we're running out of carbohydrates. We're switching over to fat stores. Running's not as easy. And there's a little bit of that physical. But then the kicker is when we realize, oh, shoot, we have 10 miles left. You know, how are we going to do this? Mm-hmm. And if the race ended at mile 17, mile 16 wouldn't feel like the wall. Mile 16 would feel great. We'd start kicking it in. But because the race ends at 26, we start worrying about all these things that might happen. Yeah. And I remember in the Olympics thinking, it all of a sudden hit me that I didn't know if I could make it to the finish line at the pace I was running, but I knew I could make it to my next water bottle. So that was all I was going to focus on. And I just focused on me to my next water bottle at 5-minute mile pace. And that's all I did. And I got to the next water bottle and I drank a little and I thought, all right, I don't know what's going to happen the rest of this race, but I know I can make it 2 more miles to my next water bottle. And I think biting off chunks of the race that I can mentally wrap my mind around kind of baited me along. Mm-hmm. And eventually I was back kind of in the race where I was catching guys that were coming off that front pack, and I would look up and say, all right, I'm going to catch the next guy. And then I would catch him and I'd look up and say, all right, I'm going to catch the next guy. And before you know it, I'm on the home stretch running as fast as I can towards that finish line. And it's so rewarding. I think, you know, in the middle of the race, it's hard to remember how rewarding it is to cross the finish line and feel that, I'm going to call it joy of doing something really hard and conquering it. And in the middle of the race, you know, sometimes all you can think about is how much you'd rather be able to snap your fingers and be back home laying on your couch. Right? Yeah. Why did I sign up for this thing? Yeah. I'm hardwired. I can't quit, but I wish that I could be anywhere else but here. Those thoughts aren't in the now. And if you can get yourself back to the now and say, okay, what can I do? What do I know I can do? I can relax. I can look up and I can run to that next post or whatever it is and kind of get some momentum going. And it's so rewarding. I think, you know, power statements of it's worth it, or I can do this, or 1 more mile, or something that really resonates with you, store that away and then just use it over and over in that marathon. And I think that can go a long ways.
That's such good advice. And so many of those things you said there can be applicable no matter what pace you're running, no matter what level you're running, how long it's going to take you. And even you saying about being in the now, I mean, many of you listening, you have hundreds of people surrounding you. So even if you just focus on the person, you know, right in front of you who is 5 steps ahead of you, get them, you know, like Jared said, just focus on being in the now. And I know my audience have heard me talk about what I call mental bottles, which is, you know, picking every time you get like a drink or a liquid, even if you don't have the elite stations, whenever you take your fluid, you then switch over to either a new mantra, like you said, something that is important to you, or even for someone who has helped you along your journey. Think about that person, you know, how you're running this for them. And then you can break it down into realistic chunks. I'm going to dedicate this next 3 miles to the physio who helped get me to the start line healthy, kind of things like that. And so there's plenty of ways you can do it. And Jared, I think everything you just said right there is absolute gold for people to use themselves. And there's another secret that you have to your racing, And I would love for you to tell us, firstly, for those who do not know, about what you did your thesis in, as I think they will find it very interesting.
Sure. So as we talked about, Tina, I'm a bit of a nerd, right? And so my life revolves around this nerd life too, and I love analyzing data. I just get excited about it. And for my thesis, I took data from a marathon in Utah, the St. George Marathon, which is the biggest marathon in Utah. And we looked at how people were pacing the race and tried to identify what Boston qualifiers were doing that was different than what average runners were doing. And what we learned is that Boston qualifiers were running the start of the race much more conservative. And this is relative to their average pace. And so a Boston qualifier is starting the race closer to their average pace overall by the time they get to the finish than average runners. The more average runners are starting much faster and finishing much slower. They're slowing through the race. And so I think that kind of told me early on, and this research was before I'd even run my first marathon. It told me, hey, I have to be a little bit careful at the beginning of the race in terms of pace, but also that Boston qualifiers did a much better job at taking advantage of terrain. In the St. George Marathon, the most downhill section is the third of four chunks. And so from miles, call it 14 or 15 down through about mile 20 has the most downhill. And it looked like the Boston qualifiers were running that chunk of the race much faster. They were taking advantage of that downhill and then whereas the more average runners were still just slowing down through that portion. And it seemed like because the Boston qualifiers had been a little bit more conservative at the beginning, they were able to take advantage of terrain. Whereas the runners that were a little less cautious, by the time they got to the downhill, their legs were too shot to take advantage of that. And so, it taught me a few things and early on, I think a gold standard for marathon running is always going to be experience. We learn a lot every marathon that we run, and we learn a lot about our bodies and how our bodies respond. And we're all a little bit different. But I think doing some research like that really gave me a jump start in terms of a few good places to begin experimenting with my body and how I respond to different things, and gave me kind of a leg up on the start. And I really credit, some of the attention to, my research and the research that other people had done in the marathon with being able to jumpstart as a marathoner so quick. The Olympic trials was my fourth marathon, and I don't know that I would have been a mature enough marathoner to perform well on my fourth marathon like that without some of that kind of extra research that I had done and reading of other people's research, just because I knew a little bit more about the marathon than maybe the average Joe out for their fourth marathon. And so I think especially early on in your marathon journey, really taking some of the advice from experienced marathoners and researchers can give you a leg up on getting a good start.
Yeah, definitely. And before, I want to ask you a bit more into that, but before, just curious, with what you just said right there and what we were talking about a minute ago about it being so easy for the mind, do you think, I know you have no research to back this up, I'm just asking you as your opinion, how much do you think of that St. George Marathon, the people that went out too fast, they were in that kind of mental struggle of what you were saying, not being in the present. I can't believe I still have, 10 miles left. Do you think the mental side came into it as well, that maybe their physical body could have taken advantage of the downhill, but mentally they were in the thick of it of, I can't do this?
I absolutely think that could be the case. Absolutely. And that, and I don't know in terms of, focus and patience and things. But for me, I don't know how long I can really focus on something before my mind breaks down. And I think most of us have experienced that at some level in school or we've been in college and doing these research projects or whatever, but you kind of hit a bonking point at some point where you need a break before you can be productive again. And at the really high level of focus, I feel like I can last, maybe an hour and a half being hyper focused. This is by the time I'm getting into a deep focus or whatever. And some people can make it a lot longer than that. I think the mind is a muscle, just like anything, any other muscle in the body. But I feel like in a marathon, if you start at the beginning, 100% focused, ready to go, laser vision, blinders on, you're setting yourself up to burn out mentally too. And I think, you have that physical gas tank that we know is going to run out in a marathon. One of the best things we can do is save a little bit of that mental gas tank. Yeah. And so I think some of that can be happening at mile 15 and 16 too.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I was kind of thinking, that it probably, some of it did come down to the mental, and physically they could have been okay. But okay, getting beyond this, someone who's listening thinking, okay, that's well and good, but how? How do I make sure I start conservative? I can't help it. I feel good at the start. I don't know how to pace myself. What would be your advice?
Well, I think for early marathoners, it's maybe a little bit harder to figure out, but for the experienced marathoners, you kind of know based on if you've kept a training log, and that's something that I'm sure you do, Tina, and that, a lot of, I think you'd be hard pressed to find many high performing elite athletes that don't have a fairly detailed training log of what they're doing. You should know based on your training what you're ready for. If you've sought out some coaching on marathon pace type specific workouts, or what kind of pace you're able to handle or sustain in parts of your long runs or things like that, I think, begin to say, okay, this is the type of training that led to this type of race. And so that when you're on the starting line, you're not shooting from the hip, about what you're ready for, because it's a hard game at the beginning of a marathon. You're so tapered and you're so fit, hopefully, and you've trained so hard that you start the race and you think, oh man, I could go this pace all day. Why don't we just crank it up a notch? And it's so tempting, especially if there's runners around you that are doing the same, that are doing just that. Yeah. But I think, what's been helpful for me, when I sit down with coach and we're racing too, when we're in the race, it's not like we're just going out there and saying, okay, I'm fit for this time, and so I'm just going on a mission for this time. Maybe some races it is, but a lot of races we're competing in, and we want to finish well. And we're maybe even more concerned with finish. And I think in that case, Coach Eyestone and I, or what has worked for me, is we have a range. I say, okay, this is a range that I'm ready for. If the paces are slower than this, I need to get out in front and run my pace, and this is the pace I'll run. But then, somewhere a little bit beyond what I think my best pace is, I'm going to eventually put a hard governor and say, you know what, I'm not going to go faster than such and such a pace, because I know that I can't last a marathon at that pace. There's nothing in my training that indicates I'm ready for that. I know there's no magic on race day. And so this is my absolute max. And then you keep yourself to that. And you say, you know what, even if these guys around me are going faster, I'm not going to do myself any service by going that pace. And I think you got to put kind of a governor out there based on your training. Now, there are things you can do in training to figure that out. I love doing some marathon pace tempos, and I'll go somewhere between 8 and maybe up to 13 or 14 miles at a marathon pace effort. And if you do that in the middle of training, untapered, I think that can be a fairly good gauge. I like in the middle of these long runs where I'm running for 2 or 2.5 hours to have a section of it where maybe for 20 or 30 minutes, I go out marathon pace towards the end of that long run. And I say, okay, can I sustain this pace at this kind of an effort? And so I think there's a few things, even for the novice runner, that you can do to say, okay, what's the right pace to be preparing for on race day? But then, for the experienced runners, you just have to gauge what your training says you're ready for and set some boundaries for yourself. Which
I think for recreational runners, you can say to yourself, okay, there's the 3:30 pacer. I am not going to be in front of them at any point in this race, because I know 3:30 pace is my, absolute best I can do. So if I'm in front of that person, I'm going too fast. You might not be able to, they might be not entirely accurate, but then at least you're in the right area and set that hard limit and do not let yourself pass them. Jared, you just said there that, there's workouts doing maybe 8 to 12 or 8 to 14 miles at marathon pace, or a long run with some marathon effort in there. How do you mentally get your head around, okay, I get it that I'm in hard training, but how am I going to add on another, 12 plus miles at this pace? Do you worry about that as well?
Well, yes. And it's funny how I can worry about it every time. Every time I'm on the start line of a marathon thinking, well, we've decided I'm ready for this pace. That just seems like a hot pace for a long time. Mm-hmm. But then once the gun goes off and you start running, that's when you think, oh, maybe I can run this pace for a marathon.
Yeah.
You do. You have to trust your training. You have to trust your taper. You have to trust the system that Tina and I, that and that I know, and that works, and just trust that it'll work again.
Yeah. And it does work. And if you are someone who has, managed to put this into place even once or twice, you will know that it, if you do what Jared, I do it already, but Jared too, try and ration out your energy correctly. Try and run without feeling, ruled by this, I have to get this time. And one more thing I want to ask you about is, a lot of our listeners, you did your research on Boston qualifiers. That is the major goal for many, many runners. And they might be running along thinking, I really want this time. It has to be today. I have to run this Boston qualifier. And you obviously have races yourself, when you wanted to qualify for the Olympics, or when you're trying to, run well at a big race. How do you stop the pressure of, but I really have to do this, it's really important to me, from kind of weighing down your mind and body with this pressure and expectation?
Well, I think most of us hate feeling, this anxiety that comes with the pressure. And, Tina, we start feeling anxious when there's something that we have to do. When you start telling yourself you have to do something, anxiety goes way up, because what happens if you don't do it? And I think the first thing that I would tell listeners is, you don't have to do anything. Like, you really don't. You can choose almost anything, and there's very, so I say the first thing is, say, you know what, I don't have to do anything, but change that and say, maybe I can do it. Okay. And so I say, start with the can do mindset as opposed to a have to mindset, and that will reduce a little bit of anxiety. Now, just like you said, there's times when you want something so bad, right? And I think of the Olympic trials, for me, that race where I wanted to qualify so bad, and I was in the best shape of my life, and I knew this was my chance. I probably was never going to have a better chance ever for an experience like this, and I wanted it. And in the middle of that race at about mile 15, a guy named Tyler Pennell began pushing the pace. And we went from running about 5 minutes and 5 seconds a mile to running about 4 minutes, 45 seconds a mile. And it felt like a drastic jump. And Galen Rupp started going that pace, and Meb Keflezighi started going that pace. And I kind of did. And I was in this kind of battle with myself saying, I don't know that I can run this pace for 10 more miles, but this is the Olympic trials, and there's 3 guys out in front of me. 3 guys make the Olympic team. So in the U.S., our trial system is one race, and the top 3 get to go play at the Olympics. And for everyone else, they say, you're welcome to come try again in 4 years, right? Yeah. And so so there is pressure. And I remember thinking, should I just run their pace? Because there's 3 of them. I'm the 4th guy now, and I'm not here to finish 4th. But then, the logical side of me said, I know that I'm not prepared to run 4 minutes and 45 seconds per mile for another 10 miles in this heat. I'm just never going to make it. And so what I can do is run my pace. And Tina, I was still nervous. Yeah. I was in the biggest race of my life. I was still nervous. I felt like for a while I was grasping at straws. I kept saying, well, it's Tyler Pennell's 2nd marathon ever, so maybe he's made a mistake. But then I was in the race with him in his first marathon. in Twin Cities, and he made a move at 20 miles, and I thought, it's too early, and I never saw him again. He won the race, and I finished second. And I was thinking, well, this is Rupp's first marathon, so maybe he's going to come back, but he's arguably the best distance runner America's ever had. He's coached by one of the best marathon coaches that America's ever had as a marathon coach and as an athlete himself. I thought it's not likely he's coming back. I thought about Meb. I was like, well, he's 40 years old. He might die, but probably not, right? He's made 3 Olympic teams in the past, and he's won the Boston Marathon and won the New York Marathon, and he knows what he's doing. And I kept trying to grasp at these things that were out of my control to give me that peace of mind that what I was doing was the right decision. And it wasn't until I eventually settled on this reality that if I finish 4th, but I run the best race I can run, then I'm going to be okay with it. And that was the switch flipping for me. It was me realizing that, and it's the same for someone. I hope it's the same for someone trying to qualify for Boston, or for someone trying to win the Olympics, or whatever. It was me just trying to get there. That I hope that you are okay with your best effort.
Yes.
And that was so liberating to me, right? I didn't have to do anything at that point except for my best, which by definition I'm capable of, right? And so then when I settled on the reality that I might run the best race of my life and finish 4th, and I was going to be okay with it, then I could start running again. And then I was competing again. And things worked out later down the race. A few miles later, I saw Tyler coming back, and I passed him, and still had one of the hardest last 6 miles of my life, even after I was already in 3rd place. But it was so liberating to finally think, or to arrive at the realization that when I do my best, I'm going to be happy with it.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that. That, I've had you talk about that before. It's so powerful. And again, something that can be applied to anyone and everyone, to every single race you do. That's all you can really do in any race. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's just so good to hear you say it, and look how it worked out for you, and it can work out for everyone else too. And I hope you really take in what Jared is saying here. Okay, so just one more thing before we kind of wrap up here. We mentioned at the beginning when I asked you who you were, you said, I'm a dad, I'm a husband. You've always come across as someone who puts their family first, which I absolutely love. That's so important to me too. But how do you keep both of those parts of your life plus your job working together? Because it is difficult, and especially running, especially at the level you're at, is selfish, and kind of you need to make choices which do impact your loved ones. So how do you keep your family first when you are running at this level?
Well, I think I think that the first thing is that I have all things in my life that I love. And so I'm excited in the morning when I wake up to begin doing the things that I love. And so, if you don't wake up and love what you're doing in life, I would encourage you to find something that you do love and then wake up for that instead. Because it's so much more motivating, intrinsically. And then second is because I love, my family and my statistical life and my running life so much, they jockey in line in this priority list, and some days, my central focus is on my family. And so that's where my ultimate priority is. Some days, a run takes precedence over going to the park or going to the movies late one night or whatever. But I think once I lay out those priorities, as long as you get, if there's not too many things in your life, and really for me, there's 3 or 4 or 5, kind of big things in my life. If I will spend my day crossing off the things that are the most important, and not spending, my morning wasted away on social media or on, movies or Netflix or whatever, it's surprising how much you can get done if you want to. And so I think it takes a little bit more careful scheduling, and it takes a very supportive spouse, and it takes good time management once I get going on different things. But if you put out a list and you begin working on the important things first in the day and see what you have left over at the end of the day, I think, at least for me, I've been surprised at what I can get done.
Yeah.
Now the inverse is obviously true. If you start the day, with your feet up and doing less productive things, it's amazing how much of the day you can lose and feel like you haven't done anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, starting the day with the things that you want to get done and making sure that you have scheduled the most important things, really gives you the opportunity to get a lot of productive things done if you want to.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for the insight. That's helpful. And I think we've all learned at one point or another how much you can actually get done when you remove the things that you kind of just do to pass the time, but then they always drag on more than you expect them to. So thanks for that.
Sure.
Okay. Right. Just to wrap up here, what are you doing next? Tell the listeners, if you can share with us, what your next big race is going to be.
Sure. So I'm excited to go back to New York City this fall for the marathon. I think that course could be a good course for me. And, we had touched on how my 2017 wasn't real healthy. I wasn't pleased with my race there this last year. I finished 12th, ran the slowest marathon of my life by a few minutes. But I had a great experience there. I love racing in New York City, and they put on such incredible events there with the New York Roadrunners. And so it really is an experience. And I had a good experience in a lot of ways, but I want to run better on that course. And so I'm very, very excited to build up and prepare for that.
Yeah.
And along the way, I'm gonna go out to Europe and run a half marathon in a small city just north of Prague.
Good way of wording
so I'm
it.
excited for that. Yes.
Jared and I were talking before. Actually, maybe one of the listeners can clarify this for us. We were talking about where Jared is racing. I said Czechoslovakia, which I don't know is right. Jared says Czech, which is right, I guess. Someone who knows maybe that area just north of Prague, let us know, because we're both a little bit confused.
Well, yeah, I read the last thing that I read online for the country. The name was listed as Czechia.
Czechia.
And so,
okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's new or not, but in somewhere over there in that Czechoslovakia area.
Yes. Okay. Well, that will be fun either way. I've never been there, but it's supposed to be an amazing place to go, and definitely will be a cool experience. And okay, we're just going to take a moment to thank our sponsors, and we'll be back with the Running for Real 4. This podcast is sponsored by Hoka One One. Hoka One One is a running shoe unlike any other. Run in their newest release, the Bondi 6. It is a running shoe with a marshmallow soft cushion and marshmallow lightweight. In the 6th edition, the Bondi has refined Meta Rocker technology to give you a smoother, more balanced ride. It is shockingly lightweight for how much cushion it packs, and the Bondi 6 will give you maximum comfort in every mile. I know you think it's too late to start thinking about a new shoe for your upcoming races this season, but actually it isn't. I wore my Hoka One Ones for an hour the first time I put them on, and they felt great. The Bondi was one of the first shoes Hoka created, and it's become a fan favorite for good reason. Just try it on today and experience the sweetest cushion. Get yours today by visiting hokaoneone.com/runningforreal with the number 4. And use promo code RUNNINGFORREAL, again with the number 4, for free expedited shipping and become part of the family. It's time to fly. All right, Jared, just 4 more quick questions, starting with my new question, which I'm adding in instead of a nutritional tip, being, tell me about a photo you have put on social media that doesn't quite show the full story.
So there was this photo at the finish line of the Olympic trials that has me with my hands in the air. I was yelling, so my mouth is open.
I think I've seen it, yeah.
And I love that photo. But everybody, and I felt like that was kind of the one that everyone took from the trials, was this super excited finishing line photo. But there was another photo that was about 15 or 20 meters before that photo, with me just coming into the finish line as hard as I can. And if you close up on my face, and I'm wearing sunglasses, so maybe it's not real clear, but I can tell that I am strained. I'm running the hardest race of my life, the hardest finish of my life. And to me, that photo was so much more accurate of the Olympic trials experience than the finish line photo that everybody loves and wants to see. And so I felt like for me, that photo 20 meters earlier was my favorite photo of the race, but everyone wanted the finish line photo.
Yeah, I could see that, but I totally get what you're saying. And, it shows what you went through to get to that moment. So totally clear. Although I thought for a second there, you were going to say someone took a photo of you like vomiting, like mid vomit or something. But I'm glad that wasn't what you were going to say. All right. What about a running?
I hope no one got that photo.
Yeah, let's hope. What about a running for real moment? A moment that only runners will understand?
Oh man. So I feel like there's this favorite run in Utah that's along this reservoir. And I've run it a couple of times in my life alone. A lot of times I'll go with someone there. But I remember coming back on this trail, and it's become my favorite run in the world. And I just came around the corner and saw the lake and the sunrise bouncing off the mountain. And I thought, this is amazing. And I hope for the runners out there that they've had kind of one of those moments where you're out just running by yourself, and the sun comes over the mountain just right, and you think this is one of the reasons I love running.
Yeah, and that I mean I've definitely had a few of those, but I love that you shared that with us. Thank you. All right, what about a high moment for you? As if I need to ask.
Oh man, when I crossed the finish line at the Olympics. I hit the start of the straightaway, and I thought, the runner behind me was far enough back that they weren't going to catch me, and the runner in front of me was far enough ahead. I knew I wasn't going to catch them, and I thought, all right, this is my finishing place. And then it hit me that I may never have a chance like this again, and I ought to run the straightaway as fast as I could. And I ran that Olympic straightaway as fast as I could.
Did you
and I
high
hit
school
that
kick
line.
it?
Yes, well, as much as you can at the end of a marathon, right? It didn't look like that. That's one of those. Yeah. That's one of those perfect what I think I look like photos and what I actually look like. Right? Because inside I felt like I was sprinting, but outside it probably just looked the same. But I hit that finish line so excited, and we talked about the Olympic race a little bit. There was some internal struggle mid-race, and it was such an accomplishment. Just that, not just being at the Olympics and that experience, but that specific race and the struggle was such an accomplishment to me that I was so excited at the finish line. I went across the line yelling and arms up and whatever, and the media made fun of me later for being the most excited sixth place finisher they had ever seen.
Oh.
But I was so excited, and anyway, so that's probably the highlight moment of my running life.
Yep.
And not because I was sixth at the Olympics. It was because of that race and the struggle in that race.
I think that's well justified, sixth at the Olympics. I mean, you must have seen the photo of me finishing 49th in the world half, and that was amazing for me, and I've got a giant smile. So I wonder what people were saying, for that race. Whatever. I'm sure you finished a heck of a lot higher on that day as well. And that nasty conditions.
That was ugly, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was bad. You had it worse than I did. The men definitely had it worse. Okay, and finally, what do you tell yourself when you stand on the start line of a race?
I have worked hard for this. Now it's time to enjoy all that hard work.
Love that. That's so good. That's something people can easily apply. All right, Jared, where can people find out more about you if they want to follow along with your future running?
So I try to stay active on Instagram and Twitter. My handle is jwardy21. And we'll just try to keep having fun together.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you so much for sharing with us. This has been great as always, and I'm sure the listeners have loved it.
Thanks, Tina.
Isn't he just the best? His advice is so spot on in so many ways, and I think this is one I definitely will be referring to over and over again. I hope that it was also helpful to see that even someone at that level, someone who finished sixth in the Olympics, still has those negative thoughts and those fears. Hopefully that can help you to stay strong and focus on being your best. I think that came across pretty clear in that episode. You can find links to everything we talked about today in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 72. And remember to enter my birthday giveaways this week. You can find them on my Instagram at TinaMuir88. That's the number 88, not ATA. Some people end up thinking I'm saying that. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/realTinaMuir, and my Superstars community at tinamuir.com/superstars. And if I could be so cheeky, as it is my birthday week and I'm giving you guys loads of cool prizes, if you could give me a birthday gift in return by leaving me an iTunes review, I would be really, really grateful, especially if you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for doing that. Next week, I have a really cool episode. I'm really excited to hear what you think, which features 6 of the Running for Real superstars. You loved the first one of these I did, and now it's time for another. You get to meet these everyday runners who have these incredible stories to share. Tune in next Friday and you will get to hear more. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.